Support for WMNF comes from listeners like you and the Suncoast Jazz Festival, featuring Diego Figueredo, Jason Marsalis, Ken Poplowski, and more. The Suncoast Jazz Festival is taking place at the Sheraton Sand Key Resort on November 22nd through the 24th. More information at suncoastjazzfestival.com.
Good afternoon. This is WMNF Radio 88.5 FM. This is the public affairs program called Community Speaks. And I'm your host, Patro Mabili. And of course, always interested in talking with you about what is going on in the country and in the world. There is a thin line between love and hate. The voters re-elected a twice impeached, criminally indicted ex-president and placed him above the law. However, watching the stock markets in the week following the election, reality over a coming economic recession amid reigniting inflation began to seep in. Voters chose to give the GOP power at a critical economic time, but do citizens even know what the economy even is?
What's the economy?
So, yeah, that's an important question. Today, we explore the economy as well as Florida's politics, especially for constitutional amendment process, the gamesmanship on the part of the GOP and their rich benefactors has been playing out since George Bush the first. President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act legislation will begin to break ground on construction projects over the next few years as the GOP leaders takes credit for the jobs those projects will produce. Meanwhile, questions of deregulation and tax cuts for the rich corporations are expected to continue to increase inequality. So both chambers of Congress will be controlled by the GOP, but with a very thin majority. So I want to talk to you about all of those things here today. Of course, you can call us 813-239-9663. That's the number to call if you want to join the discussion here on Community Speaks today. And you can also write me, DJ at WMNF.org. We can talk. There's a lot that we can talk about. I'd like to delve deeply into these legislations so that we can get a better understanding, because misinformation made it impossible for you to hear real economic debate during the campaign. Campaigns really are not the best place to have cogent, deep discussions. So maybe now that we're beyond that, we can talk now. So the Inflation Reduction Act is an important piece of the this project that we are seeing play out in this country right now. That was 2 years ago. President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, and that was the largest investment in climate action and clean energy in world history. Key to this administration, Biden-Harris's administration's investment in the U.S. agenda, this transformative laws, what it was called at the time, is lowering energy costs, creating new income streams, and tackling the climate crisis. The Inflation Reduction Act has given the U.S. Department of Agriculture historic resources to better serve communities nationwide. So what will be the end result of that? How will we proceed politically with the Congress being controlled by the GOP and with an ex-president who is well known for reversing the tide, reversing legislation and using the executive orders to provide legislations of his own, oftentimes designed to distract us from the economic legislation and the things that they're doing for the rich. So, and of course, all of the misinformation that we've been subjected to throughout these years, you can always turn to WMNF so that we can get a real discussion and delve in real facts. So, we're going to do that again today, but it is important for people to understand how we're going to proceed going forward. And I'd just like to know, what is your understanding of the economy? How, not just how you've been faring, but how do you think we're going to fare going forward, especially given these picks? And if Donald J. Trump, the DJT, looks at the stock market as his personal pole, and even remembering the last time this was clear, his approval ratings consistently down. And the fact of the matter is, whenever the markets were soaring, he would refer to that as opposed to answering real questions about something he may be engaged in, what talks he's having, what secret talks he had with Putin when they went to Helsinki. Instead of talking about answering those questions, he would just talk about the stock market and how that's all that really matters at the time. And we're going to see a return to that going forward, as we see him trying to take credit for every positive thing that happens and blame somebody else for every negative thing that happens, or distract people. But given the fact that he was just reelected, the fact of the matter is, this was the third time he ran. Only the second time he won. And first time he won the popular vote, but neither time did he get much past 50% of the vote. So how much of a so-called mandate does he have, and does the Congress have, which they have, as I said earlier, a very thin majority? Are we being clear what we expect from the power structure? And are we clear on the economy, how that actually will impact us? A lot of people were very unclear about tariffs and how even tariffs work, thinking that if we were using tariffs against China, that means China is going to pay the tariffs. But we had didn't very much understand this in terms of voters, globalization. The fact of the matter is, a lot of those companies that are manufacturing these products in China are American companies. And so American companies are going to pay tariffs on imports to the United States, even though that those are American companies. And what will they do? They will pass that cost on to you and I, the consumer, which means prices are expected to continue to be high, which is why the real president-elect, Elon Musk, says expect some hard times going forward. So we have to be very cognizant of what's going on. As you heard in the news break earlier, a lot of people have been getting their news from social media influencers, who are mostly men. And it really checks out that men responded by going to the polls, and people who hadn't voted for years got up and went to the polls, who hadn't heard the kind of backward language, racist language since George Wallace ran in the 60s. We're seeing a repeat of that kind of politics in the United States today, using the economy. But at the same time, there's mixed messages on the economy, because, white voters claim the economy was their reason for reelecting a problematic president, and people who are of color, especially black people, stood behind the Democrats because they understood the economic implications behind reelecting anyone from the GOP. If you really were concerned about the economy, you couldn't have thought the GOP was the answer. But because whites seem to be reacting and responding to grievance, which was all tied up in there with their economic message tied up inside those grievances, this worked and got a lot of people who probably held those views for decades off the couch and back to the polls. But the fact that people are misinformed, that's a major problem. It's going to be a major problem going forward, especially if the economy is the issue. And we're going to see these things played out, because there's a need for those at the top of the economy to continue to misinform while they continue to get welfare from the government. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. I want to hear from you as we move forward, because it's important. These are important issues that are continuing to be exploited. But one thing that we didn't understand was that there has been legislation on the books, even though jobs have not started. The Inflation Reduction Act was an important piece to solving and resolving the problems before they got broken again. And so that's why we talk about, and the Inflation Reduction Act was combined with President Biden's historic bipartisan infrastructure law, the American Rescue Plan, and other investments that were already underway. The Inflation Reduction Act makes a once-in-a-generation investment that supports rural communities and infrastructure needs. And when we talk about the needs throughout the economy in terms, especially even, and not just food deserts, but medical deserts, the rural America needed those things resolved as well. And so the Inflation Reduction Act purposely tried to respond to those needs, adapting to the climate crisis and creating better health outcomes to rural communities across USDA programs. That's the Department of Agriculture. The Inflation Reduction Act increases access to lower cost clean energy, climate smart agriculture, and conservation while creating good paying jobs. That was the legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act. None of that was talked about during the campaign. People were very unclear about what even the economy is or what these legislations would do. And there was a lot of misinformation, especially on the part of these social media influencers, to distract you from all of that knowledge. But there was a lot there, especially when the clean energy. And when you heard during the debates, the first debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, one of the things you heard was Trump misleading people about, the reduction, the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, and at the same time decrying clean new jobs, green new jobs. What's wrong with green new jobs? But it's all part of this need to reverse everything that has been accomplished so far. And politically, that can't be good for all of us. And it's not enough just to say, well, that's what people voted for. People, I'm not sure, were sure what they were voting for. They were reacting. And that's not good because that's not based on facts. And that's what we try to do here. The Inflation Reduction Act funding provided more than $525 million for 14 new clean energy projects that serve rural Americans. That's an important piece to all of this, powering affordable clean energy. That's called the PACE program. The $1 billion available in May of 2023 and continues to roll out rewards. But now, those who are going to get credited for all of that had nothing much to do with this legislation, even though it was somewhat bipartisan. There's been very little buy-in from the GOP, who has been responding and getting their voters to respond to extremism and misinformation about where we're actually headed economically, or what we've actually accomplished, and what progress was made on the economy, rural and urban, and how we're going to go forward from here. But that was, and then in future shows we'll talk about the CHIPS Act, which is another important piece to all of this. And people like Elon Musk are curious, is curious about how they are responding to that. And we hear very little discussion about the CHIPS Act. This is having a lot to do with China, but in strengthening the supply chain and, of course, creating jobs. But it's called the CHIPS and Science Act. And it was also designed to lower costs. And this is also a legislation that happened in Biden's first year in office. The Biden-Harris administration implemented this industrial strategy to revitalize domestic manufacturing, create good paying jobs, which is an important piece. You need jobs with a living wage, not just poor wages that keep people poor while making the rich richer, which is something that we always have to concern ourselves with when we see the rich surrounding themselves, getting involved in government just to get that dole, to get access to the government dole. And these policies having to do with the CHIPS Act have spurred this recovery in the manufacturing, adding 642,000 manufacturing jobs since 2021. Companies are investing in this country because of the CHIPS Act. This also bipartisan to some degree, this CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, which will build on the progress making these historic investments that will poise the U.S. workers, communities, and businesses to win the race for the 21st century, become more competitive, make our jobs more competitive, and our energy cleaner. But the CHIPS Act and the Science Act makes investments so that the U.S. can compete in the future. But it is also setting up this process of warfare because Trump wants to see this as the chips as something to fight about with China. But that's what got us in trouble with him in the first place, with him and China fighting a tariff war that didn't really make sense. And of course, when you put tariffs on anything imported from China, China was able to respond politically by putting tariffs on things that were headed for Trump states that red states that voted for Trump, just to target it to him. And when Joe Biden was in office, those tariffs were more targeted. Now you have the re-election of Trump, and he's talking about across-the-board tariffs, and that's why that the soaring stock market after the election, the week after the election, began to derail after a few days, because commentators were on financial news channels talking about this, all of the possibilities of how these promises coming from Trump would really tank the economy. And so a lot of companies and a lot of commentators, and of course the stock market began to show as of Thursday of last week that they were reacting negatively to not only these ideas, but to the nominees that were coming out during this transition that were being named. These nominees began to scare people tremendously. One of the biggest scariest nominees was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Soon as that was named, a lot of people really reacted, especially in the business community, react negatively to that. And the stock market showed that reaction by healthcare stocks tanking. And even those who are responsible for, especially those who are responsible for the vaccine, those stocks began to tank. And as of Friday's close, stock market was pretty much down. And if that's the personal poll of the president to be president-elect, then that's not a good showing. And even among the rich, even among these corporations, they are worried about some of these economic ideas. The question is, do we have a better understanding of these economic issues now that we've had at least a couple of weeks to hear commentary about it, to talk about it? Is what you voted for going to pan out in terms of what you thought you were voting for? So did we even think about the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act in the process of this whole campaign? We see that there are so many companies who are going to benefit, especially from the CHIPS and Science Act. We see companies like Micron announcing $40 billion investment in memory chip manufacturing, and that's critical for computers and electronic devices, and to create up to 40,000 new jobs in construction and manufacturing. And that investment alone will bring the U.S. market share a memory chip production from less than 2% to up to 10% over the next decade. And many companies are announcing new partnerships that include a $4.2 billion manufacture chips in an expansion of Global Foundries, upstate New York facilities. That's two companies that are going to merge, to Qualcomm and Global Foundries, to come together to make chips. And so the Chips and Science Act will boost U.S. semiconductor research, development, and production. Is going to continue to make this country defenses stronger, automobiles stronger, household appliances better. That technology is going to continue. But of course, in the process of all of that, these companies will continue to use this new innovation as a way of keeping their prices higher. So inflation may be here for good. It may be here to stay. And once we get, what happens is oftentimes when inflation does rise, if it goes down as it has under the Biden administration, it's going to stabilize at a higher level. I mean, prices very rarely go back to the same place they had been previously. It's why in 1970 we weren't paying 1930s or 1920s prices. But I'm interested in knowing now here we've had a good couple of weeks to really look in and think about our decisions as voters. What do we feel today? 813-239-9663 is the number to call. I'm desperate to hear from you because I want to know what's on your mind. This is Community Speaks here on your community radio station, 88.5 FM. I'm your host, Patrick Mobili. We're almost halfway into today's program, and so I want to take the second half to talk to you. Looks like Joe is standing ready to take your telephone calls, so call 813-239-9663. That's the number to call to talk to me today. We're talking about what is the economy? Do we even know what we were voting for when you reelected the ex-president and over economic issues? And the contradiction being that so much legislation already on the table slated to create jobs, but that was too little too late for this election. And we're just wondering, where do we go from here? 813-239-9663. There's so many more stories that, we'd like to share with you. But it's important because, as I said, too many people are getting their news from sources that are not even news. They're not places where they even conduct news. We basically rely a lot on Associated Press. These are reporters who are out on the scene, in the field, reporting directly back to us so that we can have an idea of what's happening on the ground wherever there is. Right now, President Joe Biden is in Brazil. Brazil is hosting and focused on G20 on fighting hunger with wars. And they're also worried at the G20 about Trump's return. That's all going on in the background of discussion. But it's important because Brazil is pushing for concerted action to alleviate hunger as it hosts the summit of the group of 20 leading economies amid global uncertainty over the two major wars and the incoming president here in the United States. But Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, he welcomed these foreign leaders to Rio de Janeiro's Modern Art Museum today. And he delivered an opening address that focused on fighting food insecurity, the heightened global tensions and uncertainty about the incoming Trump administration has already tempered expectations, which is what we're going to see happen over the next couple of months as people are trying to get ready for the stage that has been set politically by the American voter. But those expectations are tempered by whatever people can come up with today. at the G20. People are concerned about these conflicts, especially the one in the Middle East and between Russia and Ukraine. Even before the Argentine negotiators started challenging draft language, people are very, I guess they're having problems drafting a communique out of the G20 because there's so much uncertainty in the world since, we're going backwards here in the United States. President Lula da Silva is still pushing forward on a lot of these progressive issues on the globe. So I'm glad to see that he's still there fighting hard against what is a far-right cabal happening, especially in South America. And we're seeing a lot of that happening. He's getting used to dealing with that. We got this far-right president, Javier Milei, in Argentina. Some people say he's really a libertarian. They could be a little bit problematic as well. They're disgruntled Republicans, really. We have of course, Russia's running roughshod. So he's trying to keep some destabilization going on in the world. But it's good to see Lula still there fighting the good fight, but then not worrying himself about what's to come, but recognizing that it is going to be difficult to really come to some kind of a communique out of the G20 right now in this lame duck moment that we're in. 813-239-9663 is the number to call if you want to join the discussion. There's a lot going on, but even right here in Florida, as I mentioned earlier, there's some concern about what to do about how we amend the Constitution in the state of Florida, given the fact that the governor and the legislature decided that anytime you want to do that, you got to get 60% of the vote. Is that considered undemocratic, since we had two amendments on the ballot this last election that actually won a majority, but because it was just slightly less than the 60%, it couldn't go through. So the majority of the people does not get their way when it comes at least to changing the Constitution. And we see that kind of political gamesmanship that goes on in the Congress and in legislatures as well, when a certain party, the conservatives, actually the GOP, often use that trick in Congress to keep things from going their way. And so my question is, are we going to see them turn tide all of a sudden and get rid of that rule, given the fact that they can't get all the things? They only have a very thin majority in Congress right now. With such a thin majority, will they go back to just getting a simple majority to get their way? 813-239-9663 is the number to call. There were a couple of callers there. Give us a call back if you can. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. Just talking about what we were thinking economically when we had this election, and how this election was really controlled by misinformation. Those social media influencers, mostly male, who were out there controlling your mind and controlling what you heard and said, and what you actually understood what was going on. We're talking about a lot of the economic projects that are going to go on. What if the new president and this new Congress decide, just out of spite, they don't like the infrastructure law, they don't like the CHIPS Act or the Science Act, they don't like any of those things, and a lot of those jobs, actually those construction jobs, don't actually start happening, don't actually get created, because they want to repeal those legislations just because it was something the Democrats did. It was something they wanted to deny the Democrats, just as they did on student loans, just as they did on the border, so that they can continue to run on these things and distract you from what has really been going on. There's some building on investments made in what was a bipartisan infrastructure law. The Inflation Reduction Act also made $4.9 billion in additional funding available to the Forest Service to protect communities from wildfire and invest in climate-smart forestry. They say $1 billion in competitive grants to increase equitable access to trees and green spaces in urban and community forests in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and several U.S. territories and tribal nations. $1.2 billion to reduce hazardous fuels and wildfire risks to communities. $170 million to help conserve private forest lands for their values as place for recreation and wildlife habitat as sustainable forest sources. That was an attempt here in Florida to almost privatize parks and turn it into a tourist trap. And a lot of people didn't like the sound of that. And because there was a hue and cry, the governor had to scrap those plans and start all over again. Well, that's how you do it. That's what democracy looks like. Let me go to the telephone lines and see. Looks like someone is calling us from Michigan. Fred, are you there?
I'm doing great. I'm glad you took my call.
Thank you for calling.
And I appreciate what you're saying. I listen to the station regularly.
Thanks.
I'm way up in northern Michigan along Lake Superior, closer to Canada. But I've spent winters in Florida the last couple. I've been lucky enough. I don't know what's going to happen this year. But, you know, I agree with your concepts or your discussion points about the legislation by Biden. And I certainly voted for Harris. I'm a white male in my late 60s. My wife and I, our family, our friends, we all agree to this.
Yeah.
And we were shocked. But, you know, when you understand that about 10 million voters failed to show up.
Yeah, that's true. That's an important point.
Yeah. So, you know, the CHIPS Act, the economy, and people that compared Biden's economy to Trump's economy forgot to mention that there was a big difference in that Biden had to deal with a recovery.
Right.
Trump never did. Trump had a good economy.
Mm-hmm.
And I pointed this out to my Republican friends back in 2018, that he inherited a functional economy from Obama. He poured gasoline on it and boasted about the stock market.
Right.
But I said, this guy's going to trip. We are going to have a problem, a war, a crash, or possibly a pandemic, because he threw away the pandemic playbook in 2017. I'm an RN who practiced in the VA for 30 years. We had prepared for Ebola. We had prepared for SARS-1. We knew it was coming.
Right.
And this previous president, failed to understand that and prepare us or take care of our country as such. So Biden did an incredible job. Those acts he passed, the infrastructure, the recovery, the CHIPS Act, are phenomenal. And people don't get it. But as you said, listening to or getting their news from, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm outside.
Yes, you got you fine.
There's the weather. But, you know, getting their information from online podcasts and such, it just dumbifies our populace. But I have one point to contest with you.
Okay.
You have said the white voters showed up and chose Trump. And I can't say I fully agree, because the demographics show the young black men, the Hispanics in larger numbers, made a definitive difference for this election.
Yeah, and given the fact that 9 to 10 million people didn't show up, but you're right. What I was saying is that predominantly white voters made this choice, and predominantly black voters, especially black female voters, stood behind Kamala Harris. But yeah, you're right. That was a bump up in support from black men and Latino men, and to some extent Latino women. But by and large, those were white voters who got some support from a smattering of voters of color. So I think that was what happened. And like I said, some people didn't show up.
I heard this described as the testosterone podcast election. And I'm trying to think of the economist who said this. He's a noted New York economist. And he says people, fail to understand the mathematics of our economy. And if you read the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, any of the Atlantic, any of these news publications talked about the best recovery in the Western world.
Right, because this was a global phenomenon, what was happening.
Oh, man. But you people in the southern states suffer from two things: the Electoral College and gerrymandering of the type that I just cannot get my head around.
Right.
And, I don't mean to indicate anything other than that it's a political issue. But in Michigan, we were actually able to vote out the gerrymandering. And that's when we had our first Democratic sweep, and our governor, our attorney general, and our...
that required a Supreme Court in the state, though, to go along with that, right?
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And I see that in Florida, what you guys go through.
Yeah. And
I just shake my head. I mean, well, I'm not a fan of your governor, and, I imagine, like everything, there's probably some positives. We used to say at work, a broken clock is right twice a day.
Right. And I guess sometimes it's just all in delivery. Some people say that he sounded like a good, smart guy, just as they say about J.D. Vance. But, these guys... I
had friends down there who voted for DeSantis and Trump.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, they said both of them are bums.
Afterwards,
they said when they saw the performance, they were really shocked.
Right.
And these are veterans, well-to-do white people who, I associated somewhat with, and we spoke seemingly the same language. But then I finally got out with him one day, and he said, "Yeah, I voted for DeSantis and Trump." I went, "What?" And he said, "Don't tell my wife."
Oh my God. Very secret vote. These really ultra secret this time around.
Well, it's easy to be misled, and it's hard to find fact and detail and look up voting records, see what these people have supported.
Yeah.
And I fear, as you said, what's going to happen to our climate. I just read an article on one of my CDC posts, if you believe that we're still one of the world leading medical, providers in the world, that the influence and the effects of pollution on allergies, and especially peanut allergies in children.
Oh, yeah.
Amounts of nitrogen dioxide and methane had a significant increase on the number of peanut allergies that they were discovering in a group. This was an Australian study in their medicine. We aren't the only one who does studies worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I thought I would call and at least, confirm I feel your pain.
Thank you, Fred. Calling me all the way from Michigan. You feel my pain.
And, I stream you guys. I'm listening today, and you're one of my unfortunate sources of joy at this point. Because I find it a little painful. But I watch Ron Wood on CNN, Have I Got News for You?
Mm-hmm.
And I can't remember the lady's name. She's an African-American comedian.
Oh, okay.
And, she tells it like it is.
Probably Wanda Sykes. I don't know.
No, it isn't. It isn't Wanda.
Oh, okay.
I know Wanda. This gal, I just read her name last night, but they had a Republican comedian supposedly on there. And, he said, I can't remember exactly what he said. Oh, the reason Trump won because, bread was too expensive and eggs. And she said, that is crap. The reason he won, and don't give us that, because she said the rich are not paying their fair share and the corporations. And if we would have had Biden's tax plan come through, we would have had increased support for child tax credits. We could have maybe got something about maternal relief for maternal care post I can't think of the name, post-delivery. They have it in the other Western countries where you get paid child care.
Oh, yeah.
Health care. These things, we're so far behind the Western world.
And
sit here and tell us that it's the cost of a loaf of bread and people buy it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure because everybody cited the same commodity. Have you seen the price of eggs or the price of bread? That means they were being programmed. They weren't really listening to.
And what are our biggest costs? But medical, education, and you can think of the other one, healthcare. Then I say healthcare, medical.
Yeah.
But like child care, that's a huge one. My son, 2 kids. They want our legislation of our legislature up here voted against the child tax credit. Maybe that was the federal Republicans that did that.
Yeah. Plus the housing cost is
housing.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But thank you, Fred. We got some other people. We got a lot of people want to call and talk now because of you.
Well, I hope so. I hope I rattled your cage. I agree with you. I appreciate it. I don't know. It's going to be a 2-year battle.
Yeah.
I'm trying to tell my friends there's another election coming. Don't keep the faith. In the words of my generation, keep the faith. And, we have hope. So thank you so much for your show and your time. And I'll let you get on with your other viewers. I'll keep listening. And
all right, great. Thank you, Fred. Thank you for calling.
Yep.
Calling from Michigan. That's 813-239-9663 is the number to call. I'm going to go get back here to Tampa and talk to Debbie. She wants to talk about tariffs. Hi, Debbie. How you doing?
Oh, just fine. How are you doing, Mobile?
Good. Great.
Hey, I just wanted to say that if they were trying to do something with those tariffs to improve things for the companies, that one of the big ones was steel taxes to protect United States steel companies. And U.S. Steel very recently, I believe they either have sold or are in the process of selling out right now. And that shows you right there that totally does nothing, besides raising our prices, of course, for whatever products you're buying. And do you know if they're going to do any kind of election finding out? Because I understand DeSantis went around and had his election police go around and check people who had signed the petition for that number 4 movement or ballot or whatever it was. Do you know if anybody's going to be investigating that? Because that would be an election interference, I would think.
Yeah, I had heard about that. I hadn't heard about any coming investigation. I think people are pretty much, they're pretty fearful in this state right now of going up against that governor.
Because, last time he had people actually picked up and put in prison. If it hadn't been for a good judge there, they'd still be sitting in there. Probably.
Right.
Well, I just wanted to have my say, and thank you, and good luck with your show.
All right. Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that. Thank you for calling.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We got to go over to St. Pete and hear what Eileen has to say. Talk with Eileen. It's this Community Speaks. Go ahead, Eileen. You say what?
Hey there. Thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to piggyback on the gentleman who called 2 callers ago. I'm a 65-year-old white woman in St. Petersburg, and my experience is the white men are the reason that we have Trump in office. The white men are the reason why the Equal Rights Amendment still hasn't been ratified in the majority of the states. And the white men are the one who continued. They didn't want to allow a white woman, Hillary Clinton, to be our next president. And they sure as heck were not going to let a woman of color be our next president. And it annoys the living daylights out of me that they are still having such an impact on our country. The white men are responsible for all the nonsense that we have. They're the majority of everything in Congress, in the Senate, and in the White House, other than Barack Obama, who did an amazing job. And one of the things that I think Kamala Harris erred in is that she didn't attack the economy, because when Barack Obama left office, we had a strong economy. Our deficit was really low. And then Trump took it over, and he escalated it up. And then Biden had to take over that mess, and he brought it back down. We still have high rates and things, but overall, Trump is the one who screwed us after Obama. And then they've voted him back in again. I am worried for our country. I am worried for our democracy. I'm worried for my children and my grandchildren. And I don't see how we're ever going to get this to change when the white men still are outvoting us. I had a friend of mine who was working the polls, and he texted me from the poll he was at, and he said 8 out of every 10 voters were white men. Not women of color, white men. And when he texted me that, I went, oh, no, he's going to win. So I don't know what the answer is, but, Kamala was a good candidate. I really wish that she would have been in. But as long as we have all of the white men outvoting us and outnumbering us at the polls, we're still going to be continuing to be stuck with the status quo. And that's all I have to say.
All right. Thank you, Eileen. You said a mouthful. That's how you feel.
I do.
I was also wondering if there was some duress going on the part of married women who were taken to the polls by their husbands or whatever. I heard there were men going up to the voting booth with their wives, which is unheard of until this year.
Is it really unheard of, though? Or maybe we just heard of it this year.
Oh, you
know what I mean?
Yeah, you're possibly right.
Yeah, and then, of course, you've got some of the right-wing Christians. I am a believer in Jesus Christ. I don't like to call myself a Christian because the evangelical people are persecuting the very people that Christ died for. But some of those women and the men, too, take the verses about submitting to their husbands, and the husbands will tell them who they're supposed to vote for, and they feel like they have to follow it because he's the leader of the house. But if they read the full scripture about husbands needing to love their wives as Christ loved the church, it would be a different kind of submission. You submit to a man who loves you and honors you and will be willing to die for you. Not the same as what they're doing.
Right. Well, there should be a rethink, but, I don't have a whole lot of hope that, men will rethink a whole lot as long as they're in charge, especially white men.
They have no reason to. But thanks for your time. I love the show, and God bless.
Thank you, Eileen. Thank you so much for calling. 813-239-9663. You're also texting. You could text today at DJ at WMNF.org. And got a couple of texts, of course, trying to stay focused on the economy. But this emailer said that it's definitely programming. Haven't bought a dozen of eggs ever. And I'm pretty sure most of the individuals saying it's the price of eggs and bread haven't either. That's from Jerome. Thank you, Jerome, for calling. I think that's an important point. We're going to go back to the telephone lines, see what Ziggy in St. Pete has to add. Go ahead, Ziggy. You say what?
Yeah, I'm living in St. Petersburg, but originally from Europe. And I got a couple of observations. The third round of stimulus checks was unnecessary. Trump had already sent 2 checks, and government spending causes inflation. And at least that's what I learned in college. Also, Ukraine was Harris's fault. 2 of my friends are in the military, highly ranked in the UK and the US. And they tell me that 3 days before Putin attacked, Harris and Prime Minister Boris Johnson, the big-haired guy, flew to Kiev and ordered Zelensky not to cut a peace deal. War disruption and more spending are inflationary. And
Ziggy, that's the Ukraine war is not Harris's fault, despite that meeting. It's the invaders' fault. How is it not the invaders' fault, man? Come on, Ziggy, give him a break. How is it not Russia's fault?
He ordered Zelensky not to cut a peace deal. It's her fault. 100%. And I know generals. I've got friends. I grew up with them.
Ziggy, I don't think you're making sense. You're not making sense, Ziggy. Let's go and see what Simon has to say. Simon, you want to add what?
Hey, thanks a lot for taking my call. The Ministry of Truth here. Real quick. on the economy, if it wasn't for quantitative easing, Obama would have been Jimmy Carter. There was nearly $5 trillion injected in the economy between 2009 and 14 by the Federal Reserve. In fact, Obama was the first president in modern history to not have been able to attain an annual 3% growth in GDP. So when people vote, they have a certain perception. Obviously, we're listening to progressive radio, and people are Democrats.
And Simon, you have very limited memory. You have some amnesia, which was a big problem in this past election. Obama was facing a complete tanking of the economy. And we know the stock market is not the economy, but it's an indicator of the activities in the economy in terms of what corporations and banks are up to. And 2008, that was a crash in this economy. So for Obama to be the first not to attain 3% GDP is not surprising, given the fact that this economy was on the way out. No matter how much you want to believe in the ascendancy of the American and resiliency of the American economy, you needed that quantitative easing, because that was the one tool, that was one of many tools that the central bank had at its disposal. If we had a problem with that then why did you reelect Obama? Because it was working. But I have to some extent agree with the previous caller before you, Simon, who talked about stimulus, because stimulus does add to, can fuel inflation to some extent. But given the fact that that's what people needed that help. What also ended up happening is the Great Resignation. A lot of people were forced to stay at home in the pandemic and took that time to quit and look for other jobs, since they were home with their kids who couldn't go to school at the time. And we couldn't just simply open up when we didn't know what we were dealing with. And, we can't just walk around with limited memory. We have to recognize what each president was faced with. But you got in Trump a president who thought the pandemic was all a big hoax to hurt him. So, when you got a narcissist in office, there's no telling what you're going to get. There's no telling what kind of logic you're going to be left with. But this is what we are dealing with. We're running out of time. That's my time. It's been enjoyable talking with you. One emailer has wrote that McManus of USF, Professor McManus, talked about party revision, stated that the Republican Party appealed more to middle class than Democrats in recent campaign. It seems that was no rhyme and reason for that, given how much malfeasance the Republicans have shown in their handling of the economy. But I know that we've been programmed to think that Republicans have better sway on the economy and on foreign policy. And none of that has panned out to really be true. We've always had to clean up behind them. And locally, December 21st, the Walter L. Smith Library wants to know if you want to come and see an exclusive viewing of Basquiat's paintings. Jean-Michel Basquiat, which I love. Have some dinner. Just go online to Walter L. Smith Library and Museum.org and find out more information about that. Coming up next, we're going to get back to the music with Blandon Whalen. It's the Music Monday, but we're going to continue to talk about these issues. So going through the week, and of course next week, and of course tomorrow, join Sean Canan at 10 a.m. for the Tuesday Cafe. But keep it tuned. We're getting back to the music right now after we get some news update from The Scoop. Keep it tuned. This is WMNF Tampa.
This is WMNF Tampa 88.5 FM, Community Conscious Radio.
This is The Scoop for Monday.
I'm Megan Bowman with the WMNF News headlines. The Republican Party had a lot of wins in the 2024 election, turning some historically blue areas red. WMNF's Chris Young reports. Analysts reflected on what worked and what didn't at the Tampa Tiger Bay Club on Friday.
Political analyst Susan McManus says the parties have switched places.
It's called partisan realignment.